My pages are all messed up. Did somebody do that as a prank? I think you did, whoever you are. Calling you out. Good morning, everyone. My name is... Oh, good morning. I didn't expect such a strong response. My name is Kelly Shushak. I see some of you are here for the first time today. We'd love to welcome everybody, especially those who are here for the first time. Edges is a place where everyone, anytime, is always welcome. I'm the grateful pastor here, and I'm going to try to tell my face and my body what to do. Apparently, I was too excited during the first conversation this morning, so I'm going to try to temper my excitement about what we're going to talk about this morning. We're in the middle of a series. It's called Flawed but Faithful. We're looking at a biblical character whose name is Peter, who is both of those things all of the time. Helps me feel better about myself. I hope it will help you find yourself some too today. The story we're going to talk about today, it's a popular story about Peter. A bunch of us have probably heard it before. And like all stories that you hear a lot of times, you sort of think you already know the point, right? This is a big problem with a book that's been on the bestseller list for a couple thousand years. Many people think we've heard it all before. So I'm hoping that today God will tell us something new. Sometimes when I approach Bible stories, especially ones that are more familiar, I play this little game. I let myself turn it into a drama, like a full-life feature film. You know, like when they turn books into films. That's what I'm going to ask us to do together here this morning. So today's drama that we're going to be writing together, imagining together, is about the time when Peter doesn't walk on water. You know he does both, right? Those of you who've seen the story before, it's a walk, don't walk moment. Sort of like sorry, not sorry. Have you heard this story? You're looking at me like you haven't. Have some of you heard this story before? You know, it's been around for 2,000 years. All right, some of us have heard it before. Others of us haven't. That's great. It's better to always talk about anything in mixed company. So, here we go. We're going to see what happens if we imagine this story as a drama, like a story on film. And we're going to do that in order to see how God could speak something new to us. You know, the Bible promises itself that it's alive. And if it is, it ought to do different things in different moments. So the cool thing about that, if it's true, is that it will do something different for you than it did for me. That's really cool, right? All right. Well, even if it isn't, it's what we're going to do for the next 20 minutes. So, I think we should just go with it. We're going to try a little something different this morning. In several places in this drama, there's going to be a question that will appear on the screen. And that's just to give you a silent place for beginning reflection. It may take you someplace else. And that's fine. So feel free to let yourself wander, because I'm going to be quiet for a few moments and just let you think about it privately. All right, when that happens in those moments, just sort of pretend that the picture zooms out for a moment, that there's this great musical score playing underneath your thoughts, and that you can develop that movie even later during the week. All right, the story that we're going to talk about takes place sometime after the story that we heard in this community last week. Some of you weren't here for that story. Others of you may not remember. So let me just give you a little quick briefing. It was where Jesus showed his first God colors to a group of people who he called disciples. It was when he helped them to catch a boatload of fish, pun intended, after they hadn't caught anything all night long. And then after that happened, Jesus told them that if they stuck with him, their main reason for living was going to be a lot bigger than just putting fish on the table for their families. That moment helped reshape their definition of what living is. It opened them up to the possibility that life might be about more than just survival. Remember that, because it matters for today's story. The possibility that life might be about something more than just survival. So fast forward past a few other miracle moments that the scriptures also tell us about. And in today's story, we're at the point just after Jesus has done another miracle. He's helped his disciples to feed thousands of people with just a little bit of food. And right after that really big moment happens, Jesus sends his disciples back to their boat. Verse 22 of chapter 14 of Matthew's gospel recording. Right then, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead to the other side of the lake while he dismissed the crowds. When he sent them away, he went up onto a mountain by himself to pray. Evening came, and he was alone. But so were they, right? Alone in their boat. Jesus had sent them back to their boat. They should have seen this coming, right? Of course, life would return to normal. Of course, their day in the sun with him would end. Ordinary was what they had always known. It probably had been a mistake for them to believe it could be any different. Have you ever been exhilarated and then let down in your relationship with Jesus? Back to ordinary. Well, almost immediately, the sting of the old hand that they had been redealt was magnified by the fact that this was not a good day to be at the office. The scripture tells us, verse 24, meanwhile, the boat, fighting a strong headwind, was being battered by the waves, and it was already far away from the land. When you're a fisher person, storms are a regular part of the pattern. In fact, to tell you the truth, their lives were usually more bad days than good. The wind and the waves weren't new. They just represented one more in what had become a regular string of the hardest kinds of days to get through. The kinds of days where there's a swirl that makes it almost impossible to make any real headway. I don't know if you have these kinds of days. Where trying to keep your little dinghy on course takes all your energy. So Peter and everybody else on his little ship became just like we become. Exhausted, grumpy, disenchanted. The storm was probably simply another no good, very bad day for Peter. The kind that can grow into weeks or months or even years. Strings of no good, very bad days. The kind where all you can do, all you know to do is just hunker down in the corner of your boat and wait for it to pass. You know these days, right? Well, how do you know them? What storms are causing you to become exhausted, grumpy, disenchanted? Insert your own adjectives. Where are you hunkered down waiting for the storm to pass? Well, in the first half light the next morning, Peter, from the place where you were just imagining, gains enough strength to look out into the darkness. And he sees something. Verse 25, very early in the morning he came to his disciples walking on the lake. And when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified and they said, "It's a ghost." And they were so frightened they screamed. One thing we might notice here is that it's not the storm that made them afraid. It's Jesus that makes them terrified. So if you feel afraid of Jesus, just know you're not the only one. They were even more terrified because they couldn't recognize him yet. The first indication, though, that whatever it was real came from inside Peter's own body. Maybe you can trust your body to help you know what's true sometimes. And by some other true miracle, Peter's body was capable of feeling something. I don't know if you've ever been in the place where it's hard to feel anything. Well, Peter was certainly in that place. The miracle was that his body was capable of feeling something underneath that hard, rigid, damp place that his body was in, that had been his protective shield. The feeling was a feeling of terror, though. Even in the first seconds, Peter had the sense that whatever it was out there in the storm was alive. Verse 27, just then Jesus spoke to them. Be encouraged, it's me. Don't be afraid. So the ghost on the water spoke, and it spoke to him. And the familiar sound of its voice is what jolted Peter. To what? It jolted Peter probably beyond the present moment to another now far off day, when he had thought that his life might be about more than a string of storms, when he had believed the voice of the one who said fishing might have more meaning than he knew. We all have within us our experiences that can keep informing us. And so did he. The voice sounded just like the voice of Jesus, like the voice he had known before. Only that seemed impossible because he knew they had left Jesus back on the shore. So it was disorienting at first. Verse 28, Peter replied, Lord, if that's you, order me to come to you on the water. Now, that does not seem like it should be Peter's next line in the movie, does it? This is not how we would have written our film today. We don't have an option here. It really is in the script. I don't make this stuff up. It's just in the Bible. That's what it says. If it's Jesus, Peter should ask Jesus to get into the boat to save them, right? In the place where it's safe. Peter should not ask to go out into the storm with a ghost. Why do you think Peter would say that? Now, at 8:30, I could tell they really wanted to talk about that out loud. Do y'all want to talk about it out loud for a second? Why do you think Peter would say that? This is just imagining here. There's no right answer. Given where Peter is, why do you think he would say, call me to come to you on the water? Oh, he still was oriented enough to yearn for something new. What else? He didn't like the place of terror where he was. To move past it was to move into it. That's wisdom. What else?
Anybody could step into a boat, but who could step onto the water?
Anybody could step into the boat, but who could step onto the water? Adventure.
Could have been testing Jesus. Kind of like finish me if I'm drinking. Can I come out of the water too?
He could have been testing Jesus. Like a pinch me if I'm dreaming. Let me see if this is just a dream. Ooh, he's in for a big surprise if that's what he thought. Because it's always a dream. When it's pinch me if I'm dreaming, it is always, right, a dream. Well, the voice spoke again, maybe if to confirm its identity. and to confirm Peter's deep but crazy instinct to step out of the boat and into the storm. Verse 29, and Jesus said, "Come." Pinch me if you're awake. With one word, Jesus invited Peter to unbend his hardened, exhausted muscles, to use them again, to get out of defense mode, to throw caution literally to the wind, to stand up inside his little rocking ship and to cross over the stern and to take a steep, straight step into the waves. Now, when this happens in real life, it doesn't feel nearly as poetic as I just said it. It's a moment. Have you ever had the terrifying and hopeful sense that God was in the middle of your storm, inviting you to make a move? Did it occur to you to step toward God, even if it seemed stupid or impossible? One other thing I noticed here, maybe this is just for me. Brian said Peter made the choice, right? But actually, the whole thing was his idea first. Does God ever respond to our ideas? Does God ever confirm ideas that originate with us when we're trying to go toward Him? Verse 29b. Then Peter got out of the boat and was walking on the water toward Jesus. There would be a lot of music underneath this. And if this retelling, even just to this point, sheds any light on any truths that may also be available to us, then Peter's experience so far is not really for those of us who are only going to budge if it's a safe harbor we can go to. It's not for those people. It's for those of us who have a hunch that there is a figure that's calling us into the wind and the waves. And it's a little disorienting and we're a little bit afraid. It's for those of us who will do anything, even something stupid, if it's with Jesus. It's for those of us who've dabbled in Jesus and who have seen that Jesus really is a miracle worker, that we've known that in our experience before. It's for those of us who've hung around a holy but hard to understand Jesus, and we've found that it leads to a life that's more real. It's for those of us who've been about to put the pieces of our experiences together enough to really believe, but who have most often found ourselves cemented in muscle memory to the familiar boats. At least one moral in Peter's story has to be the miracle that Jesus can get through a stiff, damp shell of a life and help a body feel something, anything, even fear. In this story, fear is a motivator for faith. Could it be true? If it is, then we got to be willing to walk into it. When I was reading Peter's story, it looked for all the world like Jesus doesn't call Peter out of the storm and into safety. He gives Peter permission and just enough confidence to step out of the security he has created and is clinging to. Jesus calls Peter to step straight into the uncertain, unpredictable storm. I always heard it backwards. I always heard Jesus is calling Peter to safety. I mean, ultimately, yes, he is, but not before you step into the storm. In that miracle motion that happens there, Jesus gives Peter permission to see his life as about something more than just hunkering down and waiting for the never-ending storm to pass. He gives Peter permission again to believe that maybe life is about more than just survival. It's an invitation that Jesus offers Peter to an adventure that is only made possible through a storm. Do you see your storms like that? As adventures? The last time you lost a job, did you go, woohoo, this is going to be a great adventure? I never see my anxiety that way. Never. What if this is an invitation? What about grief? Could it be an invitation even through grief? What about depression, loss? What about disorientation? If it's true, then I think that's great news for those of us who think we may follow Jesus one day when we are less exhausted or less beat up or less battered by the constant waves of life. For Jesus, that seems necessary, like a prerequisite. If that's the case, then it's for those of us who, like Peter, are flawed. If it's true, this is great news for those of us who thought we aren't fit, we aren't ready, we aren't in any position to risk abandoning the miserable but predictable safety we found inside our boats. Sometimes that's what safety is. Miserable and predictable. In that case, it would be for those of us who, like Peter, are fearful. All right. To this point in Peter's story, what calls to you? What lives in it for you? Verse 30. But when Peter saw the strong wind after stepping out of the boat, he was frightened. As he began to sink, he shouted, "Lord, rescue me." Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him, saying, "You man of weak faith, why did you begin to have doubts?" When they got into the boat, the wind settled down. Then those in the boat worshiped Jesus and said, "You must be God's son." Can't make sense of it any other way. When Peter stepped out into the complexity and uncertainty of faith, that's what faith is, complex and uncertain. When Peter steps out into the complexity and the uncertainty of faith, he was both flawed and faithful at once. Maybe he didn't know that it didn't matter if he was both flawed and faithful. Maybe he didn't know that the end result would be the same. That whether he succeeded or failed, whether he kept the faith or whether he let his doubt get the best of him, Jesus' move would still be the same. Jesus was not going to let him go under. It had nothing to do with who Peter was and everything to do with who Jesus always is. So actually, the only place where Peter's safety was in question was in the boat where he was in charge of it. Do you believe that Jesus will not let you drown? I think Peter believed that. You can't make the story make sense otherwise. What if our stories don't make sense otherwise? Because if we can trust that Jesus will not let us drown, maybe we should practice stepping out more. If it really doesn't matter that we're overly flawed or underly faithful, maybe we should practice focusing on something, someone besides ourselves. It has nothing to do with us. What if we don't have to bank on us? What if we really can bank on God? Because if we can, I think there is so much hope and so much adventure in that, even in the storms. Well, the text says that when they all saw it go down, everybody in the boat looked at Jesus and they said, "You must be God's son." Can you imagine knowing that? You must be God's son. To give us time to think about that a little more this morning, our lead worshipers are going to come in just a moment to sing a version of that same claim. You must be God's son. In the song, it sounds a little bit like, "The Lord is my salvation." Do we believe that? Have we seen it in our experience enough that we could claim it in our present? Would we then claim that in the middle of the storms for ourselves? Could we claim it in the middle of the storms for our church? Could we claim it in the middle of a storm that is someone else's when they can't believe it? Could we claim it for them? If we can, we should.